Welcome to Straight Up Now Tell Me, Christian conversation that's straight without a chaser. There is a novel that has been out for upward of maybe 80 decades. No, 80 decades, 8 decades. And the novel is entitled How the Leopard Got His Spots. And spoiler alert, I will jump right in today and say that the leopard got his spots by being willing to listen and really being willing to change. Now, was he quick to listen? I dare say not. Was he, slow to speak? Not so much. Was he, slow to become angry? That I will say. I think he was able to check that box. So, 1 out of the 3, I think we'll give him an A+ on. But before we give the leopard a bunch of flack, are we, slow to speak, quick to listen, and sometimes, slow to become angry? I think we'll all have to answer that one for ourselves. But, back to, I guess, what I want to be our topic at hand is that for today's podcast, I want to talk about, the importance of listening and in our being willing to change. And so the leopard, kind of leapt out in front of us and got ahead of us in the game. And some of it might sound easy. It sounds like, hey, listening, learning to listen, we can check that box off, learning to change, we can check that box off. But sometimes it's not as easy as we think it is. And it can be challenging for all of us. And so I'll jump right in and I'll be honest, full transparency, that even when I think about my own self, I like to believe, for years that I have been a great listener, because I provide this time, the space. But I was at a dinner meeting, I guess about a week and a half ago. And at the conclusion of the evening, I had to ask myself, like, Patrice, were you the best listener in that space? And I kind of felt indicted a little bit by that and convicted by that, I guess I should say, if that's a word. But honestly, because, I was there and certainly had my heart in the conversation. But I think I was quick to do one thing that anybody who is teaching on active listening would have told me not to do. And that is to offer a solution. And I think sometimes the fellas get a lot of flack for that. And, they say that, most guys in general have been accused of jumping right in and providing a solution, to the problem. If we're having a conversation, hey, here's the solution, we'll jump right in. But I can't really, leave that to the fellas, because I know for a fact that I myself have been known to jump in and to be like, hey, I'm a great problem solver. Let's solve the problem. But in the whole scenario of active listening, which is, part of our topic on today, that is something that is really, I guess, that we're taught not to do. And so I had to back up off that. And so, I think it was a great conversation over dinner, and I got a lot of information. And the thing that I did do is to really record a lot of the conversation in the back of my mind, so to speak, so that I could, bring it to the forefront once I got to another location and actually write that stuff down and really be, being able to really move forward in the space where I wanted to move forward, to be helpful in that regard. But I will also say that I know there is room for improvement, and I dare say in other person's lives as well. So I want to talk about, the whole notion of active listening on today, and also of, the notion of the importance of change. But I'll jump right in on the first topic on active listening. And what I will say is that if we are able to I guess, master the craft, or really to learn how to be active listeners, then it will benefit us in so many ways. And it really will help us in the number one way to gain perspective of what, the person is trying to share with us. And so it'll help us frame out, what their thoughts are, and help us really understand, what they are trying to relay, and to really be present in the moment. So as we talk about active listening, I dare say, I always come with notes, guys, but I know that we can't go through all of them. But some things that I really wanted to share on today is that, active listening, according to, the experts who are here, requires that we listen attentively. And so try to block out, other distractions that may be there, and that it also, requires us that we make an attempt to really understand, what is being shared with us, all right, at the moment, and not just to hear the words, but to really focus in and to hear, to understand what people are trying to say. But it also requires that we respond and really reflect on what the person is saying to us at some point in the conversation, and maybe not immediately, but to really to be there, to be able to respond, and to really reflect on what is being said, and to paraphrase what they may be trying to say to us, or what they are trying to say with us. And it also requires that we retain the information. So those are like some of the key points that have to come into play if we're doing active listening. But I would dare say also, just from my experience, I think listening is an act of the heart. And so that's something that I wanted us to keep in mind as we think about it. And someone else had mentioned that active listening is a building block for compassionate leadership. And so, that's one of the benefits of really learning how to be active listeners. So if we've been called upon to really lead an organization, or to lead a group of persons, or even to lead, at home, so if we are, actively listening, learning how to master the craft, and we become more compassionate leaders in any space. But it also helps in our relationships. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. But another benefit, it really helps us when we meet new people, and helping us to get to know people in that space. But we'll continue the conversation, and we'll jump right in. And I just want to give us some tips that have been shared, openly by persons who know a little bit about this topic. And some of the things that they've shared were that in order to do active listening, that we have to maintain eye contact with the person, and really look the person straight in the face, and really have our full attention centered on them. And I think one other person said is to consider that our listening is like the spotlight that's shining on the person who's talking with us. And so we want the spotlight to continue to stay right where it is, and so that they maintain our focus. And so that's one thing. Is that active listening, it dictates that we keep our eyes centered on the person, and that we have an open posture. And by way of saying that, an open posture is something that says that I want to hear what you have to say. And so a closed posture may be, if we sit with our arms crossed, then it kind of signals its body language that we may not be as open to this conversation as they would like for us to be. And so the hope is that in learning to do active listening, that we use correct body language, and the fact that we say that, hey, not only are my eyes open and my ears open, that that I'm open to receiving what you have to say. So that's one other thing. But then also, active listening requires that we listen to nonverbal cues. The tone of what someone's of someone's voice, when they're saying things to us. So we listen to the tone, watch their facial expressions and their gestures, and just to be there in a moment, and to watch their body language. And so there are any number of resources that talk about how to read a person's body language. And I think I really would encourage all of us to delve a little bit deeper, because it's a very interesting topic of how much our body language actually tells a person more about what we're saying. So on the whole topic of active listening, those are some things. And then one thing that experts also say is to not interrupt. And that can be challenging, and I know it is for me sometimes. I have to be honest, because what they say is that our interrupting the person who's speaking can be very frustrating. And even if we think that they have paused in order for us to interject something into the conversation, what experts are saying is that just because someone pauses to reflect on what they may be reflecting on what they're saying, so that is not necessarily the time that set aside for us to jump in. And then the other thing, now we talked about it very briefly already, is that persons aren't always looking for a solution to what they're saying. And so if they're pausing and we feel that we're listening to present a solution, then they may not even want your solution or mine, right? So to keep that in mind, they may just want to share openly about things that are going on in their space. So please, I challenge myself to keep it in mind, and I'll offer it to the rest of us as, as a tip for how we can be, better listeners and do more active listening to what persons have to say. And so, keep that in mind. There's some other things that, don't, we shouldn't plan what we're going to say in response to what the other person's saying while they're still speaking. And that is a very challenging thing to do for persons who are planners and persons who are problem solvers. And I count myself in, because I think we can be in a situation where our minds are always working. And so we're like, okay, we're listening, but we're also planning, a response and all of those things. But all of that is off the table if we really want to learn and to really practice being active listeners. So we have to take that off the table, and I'm working on this myself, and so I want to share that openly with all of the viewers. And I know it can be challenging to put these things into practice, but then practice can help get us a long way if we're practicing doing things the correct way. So that's one other tip. And then when the time allows, the advice that another bit of advice is that we should ask questions and really stay focused, and then try to repeat back, to paraphrase what persons have said. And so one of the things I want to take a sidebar on is on the whole notion of being focused. And I think that can be challenging in and of itself. And I think we may be in situations where our focus may drift, even unintentionally, when we have no intention on allowing our focus to drift. And some of the things that I think that persons have cited is that, we tend to look at our phones, and to glance down or to look around the room, and maybe unconsciously, and we're still listening, but that is still a signal that we may not be actively listening to the person in front of us. So those are things to keep in mind. We may not want to do that, and then we also want to to make sure that we're not worrying about the past, things that have happened in the past, thinking about the future, or even thinking about anything other than the present moment that we're in. And so that will help us also be a better listener and being really there in the moment. But also I guess a key thing is that we've been advised not to judge the situation. And so that can be a thing in a lot of ways. And so maybe people don't mean to, or maybe it is something that just may happen naturally in some people's space. But they're like, no, don't judge what the person is saying, and just listen to try to hear them from their perspective, and not to make any judgments, or to assume that we know what the next thing is that the person may be willing to say or is about to say. And so, no, we don't necessarily know, but we can't approach it from that standpoint that we do know. But no, we have to be actively listening and say, hey, I'm not judging. I'm not going to assume that I know what, where this conversation is going, because, chances are I may not. And then I'm not going to impose my opinions into the situation. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about a moment ago about really offering a solution. And so, because again, most people want to come up with their own solutions to their problems. I think studies have shown that most people don't want us to come up with a solution for them, and unless they asked us to. So those are some things to keep in mind, and just a couple of other things, tips for how to be active listeners, I'll say, is again to paraphrase what your person is saying, and to summarize, and to really reflect upon what the person has said, and to allow them a space. If we're summarizing or paraphrasing and we haven't gotten it correct, give them a space to say more to us. And so I think it shows as an indicator that we are there, and we're in the moment, and that we are really gathering the things that they're being willing to share with us. So, but real quickly, there's some other things. So being patient is a key factor in actively listening, and really not hurrying a person along, or making them feel that they have a limited amount of time and to really relay their point to us. But then we just need to make a conscious effort to make sure the listener knows that we're interested, that we're engaged, and trying to really ascertain or absorb what is really being shared with us. So those are some tips to really keep in mind, and to help us be better listeners, to help us do active listening, and to be quick to listen, and to be a thorough listener in that space. And so I wanted to talk about that because I think it's really important to a skill to have. It's a life skill. It's a communication skill. And I wanted to just to pause again for a moment to talk a little bit about how to stay focused in the moment. And so one of the things, again, to doing active listening is to stay focused, but then it can be very challenging at times because we don't really know that sometimes that we've lost focus. But one of the key things in our goal to be active listeners, one of the key ways to make sure that we're staying focused is to do something that we talk about a lot on this show, is to get some sleep. And so we'll be amazed at, what sleep deprivation or the lack of sleep will do to us. And so sometimes it can make persons, drowsy and just basically tired, or it can make persons, people have been known to be irritable. Then it's hard to listen, to stay focused when we're irritable and we're feeling, all sorts of ways, out of sorts, so to speak, in that space. So I would say that, in order to stay focused, one thing is to get the proper amount of sleep, to get some sleep at night, but then and then also to eliminate distractions. And so some key distractions, again, we talked about the phone, but also it could be a radio playing, TV noise in the background, or it could be anything. But if we need to have a thorough conversation, then one of the things we need to do is to really eliminate distractions and maybe even go to a different space where we can provide our full attention. So that is something else to help keep us focused, and to, because we have just mentioned that being focused is a key point for doing active listening. But then another thing that helps us stay focused is to eliminate worry. And to not, be worried again about, what is going on in our own space, or worried about, what's going on in other places. But if we want to stay focused, we have to eliminate worry and thinking about things that, are causing us to be out of sorts, so to speak. And so one way to help that is to think on things that, are of a good report. And, in the situation and even in our own lives. So we can eliminate worry and take it off the table. And I think really just to continue the conversation on how to stay focused, I think one thing we can do is really to set a time and a place for a given conversation. So if we block out time for the conversation and just really a place, where we are in do not disturb mode, so to speak. And some people say a coffee shop is a great place to get this done because you can sit across the table with someone and have tea, coffee, water, juice, whatever, it is that we like to partake in. But then it limits the distractions and the interruptions. So that is something, but also, still continuing our conversation about how to stay focused. One of the key things is to not multitask. And even though we can do it, we can do this and that and listen at the same time. And I think if we're under 35 right now, I think they have mastered the craft. But I dare say that it still stands that one of the things to really help us stay focused is to not multitask and to consider our attention as the spotlight that we're giving someone else, and keep it shining right on the person, and that help us stay focused as well. But the key thing is to stay, in the here and now as we're talking to the person, and to really, I guess what I'm trying to say, to stay focused. And if we are really struggling with that, I think someone has offered a suggestion that we, kind of just take a deep breath ourselves, and don't make it noticeable to the other person. But sometimes, intentionally taking a deep breath will help, guide us back and to the situation, to the conversation. And if we have done something that has caused the conversation to go off track, then it is incumbent upon us to work to bring it back onto the topic where what the other person was talking on. So those are some things, some key ways to keep us focused. And the whole overarching goal that we're talking about on today is how to be, great active listeners, and to do, because to do what the leopard did in one situation, because it'll help, improve our lives, and to help us be better communicators, and to help us be our best selves. And again, we talked about earlier that it helps us be compassionate leaders in the workspace and other spaces, and it helps us in our relationships if we can do that, if we can use the right, body language and or, the wrong, that would not help. But if we can use the right body language in that space, and even it helps us as we meet new people. So that is a very key point that, that we can all learn from, the leopard and how the leopard got his spots, and that we can review in of ourselves, and we can grade ourselves on and really work to improve on. But the other thing that the leopard had to do in order to get his spots, he had to be willing to change. So I wanted to talk about that. And so people say that nobody likes change, and I think someone said except for a wet baby. But I dare say that if I go out and I spend $1,000 on something that only, if I hand someone $1,000 and the item that I'm purchasing only costs $5, then I dare say I like change, and I certainly want my change back. And so, but even beyond that, what I will say is that, change can be very beneficial to us. And I'm not saying that it's easy or that it will be stress-free, or that it does not come without challenges. But, change can cause us to be the benefactor of a number of great things in life. And not only the benefactor of those things, but also the beneficiary of some great things in life. But what is change? And for a lot of us, if we look at the pure definition of it as found in the dictionary, it is, well, I'll certainly take time to really read that to us. And the fact that I found it interesting that we may look at it in several different ways. So change is, something to make something different or to alter or modify a thing, right? And then also it is to replace with something else. And so, that actually got me thinking along the same lines. And we've talked about this. So those are verbs that identify what change is. And of course, there's the noun. There's such thing as, getting change back. We want our change back in that regard. But when we talk about modifying something or really replacing something with something else, it really, takes our conversation a little bit further. But when I think of change, I think of growth. And we are being challenged to, to continue to grow, throughout all of our lives. But I think what I'll say is this, that, growth can be difficult, but in a lot of spaces and more than likely most of the time, the growth that we experience is definitely beneficial to us and allows us to head in the right direction. So food for thought on that one. But I think when we think of change, if we think of it as growth in and of ourselves, I think it is a lot easier to ascertain or to really take a look at that. But not only, growth in certain, activities or certain things, or maybe even knowledge, but sometimes I think we're challenged to, to grow as it relates to our attitudes about, things in life and how we are looking at things in life and how we, view them from any number of standpoints. And so that can be challenging in and of itself, and to really develop a new attitude and to have a new attitude in our minds can be challenging, for all of us. But then also, I think we're also challenged to be transformed. And how do we do that? By really changing the way that, that we think, and changing how, we process things in our minds or whatever the case. And so the challenge is to, be transformed. And then, it certainly allows us to see and to know, the things that God has for us, and that allows us to think on those things as well. And so those are game changers in this space. And really, we are being encouraged to definitely to do that and to take a look at that and how we can grow in that space to really, change our, modify our attitudes where they need to be modified. And it requires some research. We have to, pay attention to what God is saying to us, and what are things that are placed in front of us, so that we may know where to grow and, which part of our attitude may need to change, or, what part of our thinking may need to be changed, so that we can be transformed and so that we can grow and to our best selves, so to speak. So that's something to keep in mind. But we think about the challenges of it all. And so, but what I will say is that for those of us who believe, right, then we can know and trust that, we can be strong, knowing that, that God is there, and and so that we can look in that direction, because I think we've kind of learned to do that, or are learning to do that. But we can be strong knowing that, that we're standing not only in our own strength, but also in the strength that, that God provides. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that, we're never by ourselves as we're seeking to grow. It could be challenging, and no one's trying to even act like or even imagine that it's not going to be difficult. But that is something that, we want to keep in mind, that, we're not really, standing in this space by ourselves, and that, change is something that's necessary. And so I think another thing that we've been reminded of is that, there's a time for everything that's, under the heavens. And the key word is under, right? So there's a time for, for this or for that. And so times do change. And so our response to things may have to change. But please keep that in mind, that, change is a part of the life that we live. And a lot of times, like I said, it represents growth in and of itself. And that, we don't have to stand in this space or even attempt to do the change. Is my encouragement for us all on today, to say, without, without God. And so minus God, so we don't have to do that on our own, that we have company, thank God. And so we have literally, and that we also, have someone that we can kind of look towards for direction about, how to, to approach the change and what might need to change in that regard. But also, I think one thing that God has said to us, and we'll say that, is that, that he knows the plans that he has for us. And so if we want to check in with him, which I dare say is probably the best approach ever in life, that, he knows, and he knows how to really help us along the way and help us to see things differently, and to help us make, necessary changes that we may need to make. But, the question comes up a lot of times, and say, well, God doesn't change, right? And so, there's some, I guess, references to that. And they say that, I, the Lord, do not change. Or, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. But I would say to that is that, that is okay, because, God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, God doesn't need to change, right? And so, because, he doesn't need to grow. We do. And so to keep that in mind, so when we're reading things like that, and really trying to follow, God's lead on things, keep in mind that, God is not, what he's saying is that the essence of who he is does not change. And then what I'm saying is that, God doesn't need to grow, because, he's a perfect God. So keep that in mind. And so we are still following in his footsteps, but we ourselves are challenged in a lot of ways, and that we do need to grow in this space. And so please keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong with growth, but, God may not, change, but he does do new things. So keep that in mind as well. And so then God changes the seasons, he changes the times. He was like, hey, I'm doing a new thing, and he will. But keep in mind that, he may not change, but he still does new things. He removes, kings, so princes, so to speak, from power. And he gives wisdom, to the wise. Is one thing that he's promised. And he also gives us understanding. So, so God does new things all the time, and he may not change the essence of who he is, and he may not be on the pathway to growth that we're on, because again, he doesn't need to grow, but we do. So keep that in mind. I just wanted to share that, because, things come up in life, and I guess we have questions that we could benefit from really hearing someone's perspective on that. But I just wanted to share that as well, as a sidebar. But also, what I will say, that in our case, no one's trying to sugarcoat anything. We know that change can be stressful, and we also know that it requires courage. But again, so even in that stress, we can, if it would be beneficial to us, is that if we look towards God, and really, kind of, allow him to hold some things for us, and invite him into the situation, and really, like, God, help me be courageous in this space, right? And because, sometimes it's very tough to do. And so we're not trying to skirt past that at all. But I mean, it's going to require something of us. But the benefits of really changing is what I'm trying to say, can be very beneficial and very helpful to us, and can take us a long way along the way, right, of this thing called life. So keep that in mind, and God encourages us to be strong and courageous, and to that He's going with us no matter where we go. So, and He's not a man that He would lie, and He's not lying to us. He will certainly go with us wherever we need to go. And so if we stay behind Him and really try to get to the next thing that He would have us get to, but then He's with us totally, and so we don't do things on our own strength or by ourselves. Is what I'm trying to say. So keep that in mind, my way of encouragement for that. But we might ask though, how do we get this done? And in an overall way and in a practical way. So I wanted to share how to get change done, and just to help us have something to hold on to. But in an overarching way, what I will say is that we have to really acquire knowledge and really seek after some wisdom. And the two things are not the same, but they kind of go hand in hand if we do it in a great way. But we have to to really learn some stuff and to seek some knowledge, get some knowledge, seek some wisdom, maybe ask questions. And even when we talk about how the leopard got his spots, more of a spoiler alert on this one is that he actually listened to someone who had great wisdom. And so then the benefit of that it won't solve every problem that we have, but it'll help us refine our thinking when we go after someone that has wisdom and great godly wisdom. If we yes, is the key. If we can find that, that's all the more important in our lives. But so we have to learn some things in order to be able to change. We should seek wisdom because it helps us refine our thinking and our thought process as well. And some other things we can really in an overarching way get understanding. So if we don't get it, you don't move forward until you get it. And so help us really understand what we need to understand. And so from that, and the key thing I will say is in all situations, if we lack understanding, if we lack wisdom, if we lack knowledge, then a key person that we should always include in the conversation is God Himself. And to really ask God. And so, maybe God will speak to us in an audible voice. Maybe He won't. But He will also send, He could, send persons along our path that we may not have even, paid attention to or maybe not encountered had we not asked, Him to help us along the way. So if we lack understanding, if we lack wisdom, the Word of God teaches us to ask God for that. And, and God says, if you seek me, that you will find me. And that's a promise that He has made to us. So those are some overarching things to do. And really, we do things by, prayer, to God. We can, and it doesn't have to be, and I guess a sense that we've been taught, a conversation, prayer is a conversation with God about any number of things. And there's nothing He's afraid to talk to us about, trust me, in that regard. But, we learn to change by, really praying and having direct request of God and really, being thankful and not, feeling like we're entitled, and not to say that anybody would, but just a reminder, we approach God, by prayer or by direct request, and with thanksgiving, we're thankful that we're in a relationship with us, and He's certainly thankful to be in a relationship. We're thankful that He's in a relationship with us, and He's certainly thankful to be here with us as well. And I think He lets us know in a lot of ways. So those are some key, overarching things that we have to remember. But then I wanted to really share some other practical things as well that we can add into this, and not, moving any of that off the table, but some more practical things that we could do in that space as well. And so one thing that I will say that has been shared is like, in order to change, we have to decide that we are going to change our life, come hell or high waters, what one expert said. Now, his words, not my words, but I understand the point. So we have to decide, come hell or high water, that we are going to change. So that's the first thing that we're saying. And again, we're inviting God in for wisdom and understanding about how to change. But then we're making up our minds, ourselves, that we want to change our lives. And so then another tidbit that has been offered is that we have to learn to embrace discomfort. Because, again, growth can be uncomfortable, and we have to know that, we're going to have to embrace this thing, and it may not last forever, but then we're going to have to do this because, the whole notion of growth is taking us beyond an experience that we've ever had. So just embrace it and know that, we're going to be uncomfortable for a little bit, or for a while, but just know that, we're in the process of, we've made up our minds that we're going to grow, that we're going to, that we're going to change, right? And so that's the other thing. So just embrace the fact that we're going to be uncomfortable for a season, and just chalk it up to the fact that we're growing, and try to focus on that and not the actual discomfort itself. So, but another thing that we have to do, is that, well, along the same lines, so someone quoted someone who said that, we will change when we become more committed to the change than we are to the, staying in our comfort zone. So that's one thing to keep in mind in that space, that, we have to be committed to the change and more committed to it than we are to being comfortable. So please keep that in mind. But then another thing that will help us be able to change is that we have to identify, why we want to change, our life. And I think that helps us. And so one of the things that has been suggested is that we should write down, all the things that we, that just start by writing down what we don't want before we talk about what we do want. And that someone has suggested that it's easier for us to write down the things that we don't want in our lives than it is for us to do, the other piece first. So keep that in mind. So we have to identify, what we want to change in our lives. If we want to get rid of this, bad habit, or if we want to get rid of this, jot it down. But then the challenge there is that once we write it down, to quickly move to the next spot, to the next step, so that we don't, center our attention on that. We don't focus, and it doesn't become a downer for us. But we want to write it down, the things that we don't want in our lives as well. So keep that in mind, and we don't want to dwell on that again and look at it and be caught up in the negativity. But then we also want to identify, the things in our life that we want to change. Right. And so to keep it the same things, the things that we talked about, again, the things that we would like to have added in. So we come up with that as well. And then we define, how we want to transform our lives. How do we want to, go about it, or whatever the case. But one thing I will say along those same lines is that Rome wasn't built in a day. And so that's one precaution. And we sometimes, I think, come up with, we got a 30-day challenge and we want to, get this done in 30 days. But I think a lot of the experts have said that we spend a lot of time thinking about what we want to get done in the short term, and not enough time thinking about, what we can get done in a year's time. And so to not look at the short term, but to look at the long term of all of that is one thing that has been challenged, that has been suggested that we do. And then not only that, I think another thing that has been offered to us is that we take small bites out of the pie, right? And so, I guess someone said, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time? But we focus on, one particular thing that we want to change, and do it, piece by piece, as opposed to trying to change everything at once. Because I think what it leads to, or what has been suggested, is that it leads to discouragement. And so we tend to be it'll cause us to give up, because, I think the goal is too broad. So if we factor in one thing at a time, and really set a goal and be realistic that it does not have to be a 30-day goal, but it has to be something that we're actively, working on and accomplishing. So please keep that thought in mind as well. But also, I think one of the key things I will say is that we have to have some stick-to-itness, which can be tough at times. But I think that we have to make up our minds that we are going to stick with this, because there'll be some days where we're discouraged, or we feel like, we've fallen off, or whatever the case may be. But we have to be determined that we are going to have some stick-to-itness in this spot, because we are looking at the growth that we are seeking, and the life change that we're seeking, and not the fact that, this is a bad day. And so we have to, I guess, change the channel in our mind, is what I'm trying to say in that regard. But then the other thing is that we need some people in our space. And so I've heard it said and I guess about any number of things. So, that God never intended for us to do anything in and of ourselves, all by ourselves, right? And then, someone even mentioned this week that, even when Jesus Christ was here, as recorded in the Gospels, that he didn't do anything. He didn't seek to do, any and everything by himself, right? Now, maybe there may be times when he stole away to pray, but he always came back, and he has some point people in his life. And so that's key, some people to encourage us along the way. And even if it's in the form, someone has suggested, of a support group, so to speak, online or whatever, persons who are seeking life change, some people that we can plug into, then that's great. Plug into that, because that encourages us, to helps us keep, focused and on track. But then on the flip side of it, there may be some people that we have to, to really part ways with. And because, may have been friends with for years or whatever the case, but if they are not helping, with the life change, or if they're detracting from it, or, maybe they don't mean to be discouraging, but they are, then the deal is that, we don't need that in our space as we're seeking to change, because it becomes a hindrance. But if we have family members and friends that we can tap into, then all the better, who are supportive of us and who help push us forward in the life changes that we're seeking, then that's great as well. But if we have to let some people go, and it's not that you don't love them, but if you have to let them go, if we have to let them go, then it's for the good, so to speak. And so that can be challenging, but then it is something that maybe that is very likely necessary in order for you to make the life change, or for us to make the life changes that we're seeking to make. So please keep that in mind. We need a support team around us, and hopefully that can come by way of our loved ones and friends. And if not, then find a community, online or otherwise, that's doing the same thing that you're doing, and really plug in. And you may not have to plug in daily, but as much as you can, plug in to be refreshed by that. So that's another tip that's been offered, and again, to be patient, and to be focused on the process, and not necessarily the results, because if the results don't come instantly, but we're focused on the process, and really being able to make these changes in our lives. But then also, I guess the key thing that's been shared is to not wait to start, but to start now. And I think that's probably one of the best tips we could ever find, ever receive, is to start now. Don't delay until we forget or lose sight of it, or we feel discouraged by someone else or some other comment that we may run into. But no, just to start it now, and to really figure out what truly matters and in that space. And to do self-reflection, or some other things that we could add in to help us know again why we're here, and why we're seeking to change the things that we're seeking to change, and again to have positive relationships in our space, and to make the goals achievable, and to learn and to grow continuously in the process. We need to expand our knowledge, and to really take some steps to challenge ourselves to do things differently. And someone said, just be committed. I'm not going to eat the same thing every day. I'm moving out of my comfort zone. That's a small step. Or either I'm going to learn, look at a new documentary. I'm going to expand my knowledge beyond some things I might know right now. Or I'm going to maybe go to a different place that I've never been. But I'm always continuously learning, and not delaying my actions, and really, practicing, being grateful, gratitude, and mindfulness as we go along this way, as it relates to others. But so those are some practical tips that have been offered to all of us, and I certainly hope they helped on today as we seek to learn to be, active listeners, and to change as the leopard changed, and it benefited him tremendously. And maybe we'll attach that story if we can successfully do it to the end of this podcast. If not, we'll put a reference where you can find it. But it ended up benefiting the leopard's life, the changes that he made. And certainly when we make changes, and we learn to listen to other people, to actively listen, and to be a benefit to others, we find a lot of times it's beneficial to us as well. So please keep those things in mind, and so we can make changes, we can be better listeners, and we can again change the things that we want to change in our lives, and make a significant difference in all of that. And what I will say is that for those of us who love God, that we know that all things work together for our good that are in Him. And so, change can benefit us if, as long as we stay the course and invite God in and keep Him in there with us, then it can be beneficial to us beyond measure, right? And then, we can certainly do, all things, as we're often reminded, through Christ, the things that strengthen us. So keep that in mind, and to invite God in, and certainly lean on Him as we talked about, having a support group around us. Certainly, make Him part of that support group and allow Him to, to guide. And a lot of times He'll do it, quite honestly, through, we can find a good, Christian broadcast, and I do mean a good one, and not just any one, right? Sometimes, God will guide us through that. Sometimes, I like to say He'll find, some of the oddest ways. And I've shared previously that, God has, spoken to me about trying to be a loner through the movie Shrek. So whatever is in front of us, God can certainly use to get a word to us and to get a reminder to us about, things that are important, is what I'm saying. So certainly invite God in and let Him work to renew, a right, spirit within us, a right mindset within us as well, and to certainly keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ is my final word on this one, as we seek to be, better listeners and to really make life better for someone else, as we make, hope, and make life better for ourselves, and as we seek to change. So thank you again, and I hope that's as helpful to you as it is to me. It's certainly helpful to me to talk about these things. And again, my goal is certainly to be the best listener that I can be, and to be in the moment and not planning a response or a plan of action, in the moment. No, to really be listening, and it's also to change some things up in my life as well. So thank you again for being here and for joining us on Straight Up Now Tell Me, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Change has come over me. Change It's a beautiful change. A change. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Said He changed my walk and He changed my talk. Anybody grateful for Jesus? Changing me was a ransom done, but you saved me. Wonderful change has come over me. Wonderful change. I'm so glad about it. Has come over me. Yes, it has. Over me. Change. Change has come over me. It's a beautiful change. my tongue. Anybody grateful for Jesus? Thank you for changing me. Resurrection done, but you saved me. Wonderful change has come over me. Wonderful change. I'm so glad about it. Has come over me.